I left my mic on. I didn't take the charge off. Well, page 225 in the New Testament section of the Bible there in front of you on that back of that pew, 225, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Through 6 of 2 Corinthians 3. Does this sound as if we're again boasting about ourselves? Could it be that, like some other people, we need letters of recommendation to you or from you? You yourselves are the letter we have written on our hearts for everyone to know and read. It is clear that Christ himself wrote this letter and sent it by us. It is written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, and not on stone tablets, but on human hearts. We say this because we have confidence in God through Christ. There is nothing in us that allows us to claim that we are capable of doing this work. The capacity we have comes from God. It is He who made us capable of serving the new covenant, which consists not of a written law, but of the Spirit. The written law brings death, but the Spirit gives life. The title of the message is Living Letters. Living Letters. How many of you have a Facebook, Twitter, or other social media account? Okay, I just want to know who I'm preaching at this morning. Not true. How many of you who raised your hand and have those type of accounts have posted something of a personal nature at least three times a week? Oh, now they're lying to us. I don't believe that. Bunch of fibbers. At any rate, I think personally, social media is a fantastic thing, isn't it? It is. Our words and pictures are able to be read and seen by other people we call friends, and that may be a dubious term at best, but still they're called friends. Now, I'm not about to argue the merits or the adverse effects of social media. That's not what I'm saying here, except to say that it has probably robbed the human race of a medium of letter writing, and I think that's sad. I do, however, like the medium of texting. I really like that. What a time saver. But that's a subject for another time. We won't go into that. Letter writing. Paul says here that he says to the Corinthians, you are living letters of us. You are living letters of God. Written so that the whole world might read it. Letter writing, and especially letters that were exchanged by people called pen pals. Anybody still have a pen pal? I'm not talking about social media pals and friends. An actual pen pal that you sit down and write longhand letters to. Anyone still have those? No, that's gone. Oh, well, you got one back there, Pat? Do you really? I get letters from people, but I don't know, when did they stop teaching how to write cursive? If you're dyslexic, like some folk I know, to read blocked letters, some lady, I'm moderator of the conference this year. One of my team members brought me all that I had assigned her to do, written in large capital letters, the whole thing. Now, if you're dyslexic, guess what happens to all of those capital letters? They run together. I couldn't read it. I said, whoops, sorry, buddy, I'll have to take it and decipher it at home when I get some time. But we've missed, I think, the concept, and what I was getting at there is that everybody knows how to print. They don't know how to write longhand anymore, or cursive as it's called. But I still get letters. I get letters from prisoners. I don't know how you write 6 or 7 page letter printing it. I couldn't do that. But at any rate, Pen pals are someone who maybe in another city, another state, another country that you exchange letters with. Now, granted, social media has helped change that considerably. You don't have to wait for days or even weeks to get your letter or your communication from those people. But I think that pen pals, the idea of it's pretty much slipped into oblivion, and I don't think it's ever going to return. Except for a few diehards like Pat Lynn back there, right? Let me share with you a story about two pen pals. I just wanted to tell you that so you understand, those of you who don't, what a pen pal is. This item was in the newspaper a good while back. It was about a starstruck teenager in 1943 named Lorraine Wagner. Lorraine sent a fan letter to an actor named Ronald Reagan. Reagan took the time to sit down and write a short note of thanks back to her. But Ronald Reagan and Lorraine Wagner became, over the next 50 years, pen pals. He wrote to tell her about his career, his marriages, and all the mundane things that friends share with one another. She wrote the same things to him. Even after Reagan was elected President of the United States, he and Lorraine kept in touch through pen pal. Their correspondence ended, of course, in 1995 when Reagan's Alzheimer's disease made it too difficult for him to continue writing. For 52 years, Lorraine, an average citizen, was a pen pal of a man who became the leader of the free world. Paul in our text says his readers held a unique position. You know, we can look at the Corinthian letters and see all the bad things that happened in that church. And I'm sort of glad those things happened, or we wouldn't have that correspondence from God to tell us how to correct some of those things. But Paul says they were living letters, and the transformed lives of the Corinthian Christians were living letters of commendation to him personally. The church at Corinth was certainly not perfect. Far from it. They had problems, and Paul in his letters pointed out those, as I said earlier, the inconsistencies. He did it in detail as he wrote to them. Yet Paul called them saints, I'd like to remind you. And here he says they are living letters. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. Two different things we're going to look at. We'll see our role as living letters. First of all, let's establish that fact. We are living letters. Our lives as believers are to be lived for a witness to Jesus Christ. And Jesus says the world should be able to read his love letter, his love, through his followers. Let me say it again so you're on the same page and line with me. We are living letters of Jesus Christ to this world. Jesus says, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. You're a letter. You're a letter that Jesus wrote and gave to the world. And he says, by that love, and by the reading of that love inside of every believer, the world will understand that we belong to him. And some of them will become believers because of it. He wrote a letter to the world. A living letter. And that letter was you. And that letter was me. Our love for one another, or the lack of it, is being read by non-Christians every day of our lives. Every day and every moment of our lives. I don't know about you, but to me, that's a heavy weight. That's a heavy weight for me to bear. That everybody who sees me in any given day is able to read the letter that Jesus wrote. And they can read bad into it, or they can read good into it, right? When I'm at Walmart, in that mood that I get when I walk into Walmart. It actually starts when I drive into the parking lot. And this, isn't it ironic that my wife's best place to be is my worst? I mean, she's happy going to. I mean, we look at every item in the place. And I'm a typical guy. Let's go exactly where we need to go and get out of here. Doesn't happen that way, does it? But, never does. But, maybe I'm failing to remember when I'm grumbling in one of those long lines where they have 2 cashiers and 58 checkout places. I'm saying, where are all these other people? Well, they're back there in the corner talking. When I'm grumbling about it, do I remember that, wait a minute, I'm a letter that Jesus wrote for these people, if they're not believers, to read. Wonder what their interpretation is today of that love that I'm to be expressing. And that's a heavy weight to bear, isn't it? Yet God has provided help for us in our efforts to be this type of living letter, to be read of all men. And he tells us in verses 4, 5, and 6, he says these things. We can live as letters to the world because our confidence is in not ourselves, but in Christ. That's where our confidence is. Even to live this life, our confidence is in Jesus. I need to remind myself on the way to Walmart, my confidence is in Jesus, not in myself. Therefore, I can do this. That we can live as letters to the world because our sufficiency is totally from God. We can live as letters to the world because we are servants of God through the Spirit. And sometimes I don't think and maybe you, don't rely upon the Spirit enough. We just want to wing it by ourselves, and guess what? That's when I get all messed up. We can't love one another except it come from God as well. Only through His grace can that be possible. Which takes me to the second point, and there is an outline in your bulletin somewhere there. As living letters, we are read, and we're read in 3 ways. First of all, we're read by what we say. This is done by communicating our love for God by our confession. We communicate daily to those around us whether God lives in our hearts and what He means to our lives, or we don't. Do they hear words of praise from me? Words of love? Words of encouragement? Words of power, words of peace, words of hope, words that make people feel better about themselves? Or do they hear the negative from me? Well, some of us are bent on negative. You do understand that. Some of our personalities are bent toward the negative, and that's just a personality thing. It is also, if you have a prophetic gift, and I'm one of those people, that we are bent on the negative. I can walk into a room and point out every negative thing that's going on. But if Charlotte says, what do you see as positive? You have to tell me. But if you will read and study the Old Testament prophets, you will see that's part of having the prophetic gift, is that we see the negative first. The Apostle Paul says it sort of like this. He says, this is what I want you to think about. Whatever is true and noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And I would add to his word by saying, not just think, but say these things. Try it. Try it. Paul says in another place, Ephesians 4:29, he says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. When he uses the word corrupt, he's not talking about what your mind would automatically think. The word corrupt and the word negative are synonymous. Let no negative communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying or building up, that it may minister grace to the hearers. Are you ministering grace, or are you ministering corruption? The negative or the positive? Grace is positive. We are read by what we say. We are read by what we do, secondly. That is our conduct, how we act. We're told in the book of 1 Thessalonians 5:22 to abstain from all appearance of evil. Colossians 3:23 says, and whatsoever you do, do it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. Today's Mother's Day. I didn't forget you in this message. Today's Mother's Day. And whether we want to believe it or not, how we act, that is what we do, reflects on our parents. You know how many times my poor, God rest my mom's soul, told me that? Boy, don't you understand this craziness makes people think I'm crazy? Amazing how smart she and Dad got over the years, amen? Isn't it? It's just amazing. Let me give you an example of that. Something that was recently in the news. And it's, of course, as you follow the news, you realize what was news yesterday and what will be news today will be forgotten tomorrow by the news media. They're always looking for the new thing and the ratings, what it'll do for them. This was in the news maybe a month or so ago. And I've got a newspaper article here, and I'm going to read part of it to you. And it started out like this. Their reputation sullied by race-tainted incidents, many colleges are clamping down on campus fraternities. And they continue in the article. At Oklahoma, the university quickly expelled 2 students and banned Sigma Alpha Epsilon last week after fraternity members were filmed engaging in a racist chant, you remember this, that referenced lynching and indicated that black students never would be admitted to that university's chapter. 2 students identified in the video have apologized publicly. The article had an accompanying photo. And I keep this. I probably can't tell you why I keep this. But it shows people protesting outside the home of one of those 2 students that apologized, that one who was leading the chant. Parker Rice was his name. And this still is his name. One of those named as the apologetic students. And yet here are people protesting outside of his parents' home. Now the point of this is that no one had implicated the parents of Parker Rice in anything, had they? I never heard one word where the parents taught him to be a racist. And yet people are protesting outside of his home. Guilt by what? Association. They had no right to protest in front of his parents' home. That's ridiculous. And yet, what the son did reflected upon the parents, right? Yeah, this is Mother's Day. We all want to certainly, if our moms are still alive, honor them today. But I want you to remember that what you do, what you say, how you act, reflects upon your mom. No matter how old you are, no matter how old she is. We are also read by our appearance. That's done. Now, I'm not talking about clothing here. I'm talking about what is seen on our faces and in our attitudes. That's our appearance. Our attitudes primarily. Maybe this point I think can be illustrated. But let me give you another one here before I leave that what you do. And this was in the newspaper, and my wife asked me, well, don't you know a so-and-so, you know, his whole name is, yes. Well, this guy's 45. I said, that's his son. Now, the friend I have, he and his wife they're both retired now, of course, but educators in our public school system. And yet here was the son, charged with terroristic threats, simple assault, reckless endangerment, theft, receiving stolen property, disorderly conduct, discharge of firearms into an unoccupied structure, and retail theft. That's enough, right? Now, every time someone sees my friend's name, who are they going to think of? And what are they going to think of? Yeah. It reflects upon our parents. How about what people see on our faces and in our attitudes? Let me give you an illustration here, a story. Little boy wanted to meet God. I'd like to see God. Thought about it. He said, you know, probably going to be a long trip for me to go see God. And so he packed a little suitcase. Boy after my own heart. He filled it with Twinkies. and a 6-pack of root beer. And his mom, you know, go ahead. Went off on his journey. Well, he got to the city park, which was, by the way, only 3 blocks from his house. And he got a little tired. He was tired of lugging that suitcase with all those Twinkies. So he sits down next to a woman who was sitting there, an elderly woman, in the park. And he just sat down to her. They did not exchange words. They just looked at each other. She smiled at him. Boy thought he was a little hungry, so he took one of these Twinkies and started to eat it. And the lady smiled at him again as he looked at her, and he offered her a Twinkie. She took the Twinkie, smiled at him again. He thought to himself, you know, she's got a beautiful smile, this lady. So he offered her a root beer. And he got a bigger smile out of this lady. And so they sat there and just shared their Twinkies and their root beer most of the afternoon. The boy decided, well, you know, I think I'm going to go home. And before he got around a few steps away, he turned around and looked at the lady again, and here was the biggest smile she had smiled at him all day. When he gets home, his mother said, you have a look on your face that I have not seen. What joy or what's happened to you to cause this? And he says, well, I had lunch with God. And she's got the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. Now, you purists out there and theologians, let me go a little further. Meanwhile, the elderly lady, also with that radiant joy on her face, returned home. Her neighbor, stunned by the look of peace and joy on her neighbor's and friend's face, says, what did you do today that made you so happy? The elderly lady says, I ate Twinkies in the park with God. And you know what? He's much younger than I expected. You know, who knows? Maybe the only thing some people will ever know about God, they will see in your appearance and in your attitude. Are you offering your Twinkies and your root beer? Are you smiling? Not easy, is it? No. If you think this is easy, you're not really trying. It's not easy. But God has chosen to make us living letters. This is His way of doing things. He says, okay, well, I'm going to die for you. I'm going to shed my blood for you, that you can all be saved and escape the devil's hell. And I give you heaven. This is all I'm asking. Be my living letter to the world. Represent me to the world. But you know something? No matter how inadequate we may feel in our role as living letters, we can have assurance in this great news. As living letters, we're written more than once. We're written, and guess what? The day ends, and the morning comes, and we get to be what? Rewritten again. And that day ends, and next day comes, and if you and I have survived the night, we get to be what? Rewritten again. But guess what? We get to be reread each day as well. And reread and reread. So no matter how much we may blur the writing of God's letter to the world, we can rewrite it. We get that opportunity. Each new day brings an opportunity of being a new living letter for God. Please take that red hymnal.